Hello, everyone. This is Amy Winters. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to begin in about 5 minutes. So stay tuned for the Dia de los Muertos, Real-Life Experiences Using Authentic Spanish Resources webinar with Rich Sayers. We'll begin in just a few. And for those of you who are on right now, if you want to locate the hand button on your GoToWebinar control panel and click it to raise your hand to let us know that you can hear and see our screen, that would be great. Perfect. Thanks for those hands. Hello, and if you've just joined, we'll be beginning in just a couple minutes. If you can hear and see my screen, if you've just joined, go ahead and raise the hand so we can see, and we'll begin in just a minute. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. We're so excited you're here. We're going to dig into our session here shortly. We have just a few introductory items. I want to talk for just a minute about our presenters today. My name's Amy Winters. I'll be hosting, but I want to show you who our presenters are today. We're going to have Rich Sayers, who's an Auténtico author and VP of Humanities, and then Lucy Amarillo, who is going to be a world languages specialist, chiming in too. And Juan Cabrera is also a world language specialist. So we're really excited that you're here today, and we want to provide you some valuable things. One of those valuable things is a certificate of participation so that you can earn professional development hours for attending the session. And we'll be able to send that out to you later on for attending, and we thank you for being here. The other thing that we want to mention in terms of something that we're going to provide to you is a Dia de los Muertos toolkit. And this is something that you can use in your classroom. It's free resources available to you. We'll be talking more about it later on, but before we dig in to the toolkit at the end of the session, we want to talk about some other things that are good to know and things that you can apply as you're even using some of these toolkit items. So that being said, we're going to ask you to chat, and the first thing I'd like you to do is locate the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel, which should have popped up when you signed into the webinar. And if you can just type something in the question box right now that lets us know that you've seen it and you know how to use it, you can put your name, you can say hello, but go ahead and type something in the question box right now. We're going to be asking you some questions, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to see what you have to say, hear your ideas as Rich goes through some of the resources. So feel free to answer questions in the question box or ask them. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Rich Sayers, who's going to talk about our goals for the session. Rich, thanks so much for joining, and Lucy too, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Amy. This is a great opportunity as we're thinking about a time that Dia de los Muertos with our students to think about how we can use authentic resources in our Spanish classroom. So we're going to talk first about how to identify those resources, determine effective strategies to use with our students as they experience them, and then explain ways that we can really meet all of our students' needs using the authentic resources. It's always good to kind of get a baseline understanding. So when we talk about authentic resources, what we're talking about are those resources that are created by native speakers for native speakers, and that's really important. So often within our textbook, we might have a little cultural reading about Dia de los Muertos, but when we use an authentic resource, that means that it could be somebody who was videotaping a celebration that took place somewhere, and that went on to the actual news channel for that community in Mexico and so forth. Now, all of a sudden, that was an authentic resource developed by those native speakers of that TV channel for the people that were there. Now, for our classroom use, I think a key thing to keep in mind is the idea that what we do is we tailor the task, not the text, when we're working with our authentic resources. And what we mean by that is often the text itself, that commercial that might come from the TV, or the story that was written about Day of the Dead could actually be maybe beyond the level of where our Spanish 1 students are. Hopefully, first of all, we'll be selective in our choices, but what we want to make sure is that we tailor the task, meaning in the same way that a tailor adjusts clothing and all that kind of thing, we're going to make those adjustments to what we expect our students to do with that authentic resource, but we don't have to go in and actually change the authentic resource. And the beauty of this, of course, is that we can have an authentic resource that maybe we could do first hour with our Spanish 1 students and fourth hour with a more advanced class, but the task has been changed to go with that. So what might those examples be? Well, in a general sense, these are the kinds of things that we typically are always using within our classroom. Many of us in our travels have brought back subway maps, and we use menus and different types of things like that. But we also are using more of the kinds of things, especially that we're able to get online, podcasts and blogs. We, of course, love to bring in songs and works of art. Literature has always been a favorite way that we can bring in authentic resources, and of course in TV commercials and TV or movie clips. Some of you may be thinking right now, like, wow, what are some of those things related to Dia de los Muertos? What are some of those other authentic resources that are out there? And again, when Amy and Juan come back, we'll show you some sources that you can use right then. Lucy Amarillo, my colleague, is on with us today, and she not only was a Spanish teacher herself, but works all across the country with Spanish teachers. So, Lucy, is there anything else as you look at this list and you talk to Spanish teachers that you find that they're doing right now to bring some of those authentic resources into their classroom?
Thank you, Rich. Wonderful to be with you this afternoon. Well, really, you've got a great list going right here. I have had some teachers tell me that they use the phone book, which I thought was kind of cool to think about some of the advertisements that come in a phone book. And I thought that was a very unique way of being able to highlight truly authentic if you get one from a particular city, maybe in Barcelona or somewhere. But I thought that was interesting and something I'd never heard of. But pretty much that's a great list you have right there. Of course, anytime you use menus from different countries, it's a great way of highlighting how you might have the same recipe done differently, like quesadillas might be differently Tex-Mex style as they would be done in Teotihuacan. So that's one thing that I thought would be kind of cool, is to even differentiate between menus.
Great. And that, what Lucy has just said, is a nice segue into our next point. Lucy actually made me aware of this recent article from ACTFL. You see the title at the bottom, Use of Authentic Text in Language Learning. And it's a whole article. You can go actfl.org and find that, and gives you a lot of good explanations similar to what we're talking about here. But the part that really captured my attention was why authentic resources. So I took the information from there. It just made it kind of easy with these bullets, but just to go over them. So first of all, they are those real life examples of language used in everyday situations. Students who are sitting kind of in our contained classrooms need to know that this is real life stuff out there. That adds that interest. And it's a reminder to them that even though I walk into this third period class and there's walls around me, there's an entire population out there who's using this language every day. And then to Lucy's point, it's not just the language, but there's a culture that goes along with this language. And that culture has perspectives. So if it's a type of food, or if it's when food is eaten, all those kinds of things, all of that can emanate from that authentic resource. And then, of course, we know our students who are going to use language, acquire language, they need to start with input. And what better input than the actual authentic resource. So thank you, Lucy, for calling that to my attention. And again, I encourage you all to just go to the ACTFL organization and find that. That'll be a good way to kind of follow up what we're talking about today. We're going to use examples that come from our Auténtico program, and it gets its name by the fact that we do want to emphasize this. But more than just talking about our program, we really want to integrate your ideas. What kinds of activities and strategies do you use to help students successfully experience? And our first point is going to be looking at authentic video. And some of you may have Dia de los Muertos on your brain right now, and so that may be the video. But the fact is we use authentic video all year long, and so we'll use some other examples. And then I just love to hear some of the activities and strategies that you use. All right, so first of all, here was an example where we partnered with Inter-American Development Bank. And you can see that this is a really good example to use, especially with a level 1 program, because deporte, cultura, innovación are all things that would be easy to talk about with our students. So one of the things that we recognize that we need to be able to do when we're bringing in that authentic video, especially to a Spanish 1 or Spanish 2 classes, we need to really prep them. They need to have some good strategies even before they begin to view it. So what we've encouraged teachers to always think about is always make that personal connection, that building of background knowledge, that helping them to think about they already know something about this topic. Usually we wouldn't be bringing the video in if that hadn't had some connection to what we've been doing, and they actually have had the opportunities to develop some conversation along this line. So let's make sure that before they watch the video, we have them really kind of prepared for that. In addition, sometimes we'll find that it's appropriate to do vocabulario clave. There may be some key words or expressions that we can do that we can introduce to them as we begin. And one strategy that I like to always recommend, and that I used a lot in my classroom, was to watch the video the first time with the sound off. Once that sound comes and it's at a level that's going to be kind of beyond our students' normal rate of speech and so forth, some of them will just really turn off. They might be overwhelmed. If we can have them watch the video one time, we can have them begin to think, I wonder what words in Spanish I'm going to hear that I already know. I wonder when I see the girls playing basketball, I think I'm going to hear them talk about this. And maybe they even begin to make predictions. And then as they then listen to the next time with the sound on, they begin to validate whether some of those predictions are true or not. Another thing that we recognize about our students is that we need to have them be active learners. What I mean by that is we know from the generation of students that are sitting in our classroom, they don't sit idly real well. And so whether we're watching a video, whether we're reading, whether we're listening to something in audio, the more we can make them active in that process, the better it's going to be. So a great one, especially with lower level students or students who may be struggling, is just to get them to recognize what they already know. And that could be Spanish vocabulary they already know, but it's especially cognates. Don't get overwhelmed by what you don't know. Start with what you do know. Can you listen for certain words? So here's a case where we're kind of preparing them for the fact that they're going to hear a lot of words, or at least they're going to maybe see some words and hear some words that they can begin to figure out based upon their own language that they bring to it. So giving them those strategies of while they are viewing. Another one that goes along that same idea that I started to mention before, and that is use the idea of visual cues. Watch as you're doing this, and maybe even complete a little task where you use the visual cues by identifying different activities that fit into the themes of deporte, cultura, innovación, and have them do that and really make those visual connections. So again, what it's teaching them is I'm not going to understand everything, but wow, I can capture quite a bit, and I can get quite a bit from what I see and words that I already bring into it and build that level of confidence in them. So let me give you an example of what this might be like as far as the actual video.
Casi el 40% de la población de América Latina es menor de 30 años. ¿Cómo se puede reforzar su capacidad de éxito en la vida? El deporte, la cultura y la innovación fomentan su desarrollo y participación. El deporte es sumamente importante en la formación de jóvenes en general porque ayuda a desarrollar habilidades útiles para la vida, habilidades no solamente en lo físico, sino también en lo social. El arte y la cultura crean alternativas de vida. La danza es mi vida, es parte de mi vida. La danza me ha dado libertad, felicidad.
So you kind of get an idea there. And then, of course, we would always want to have some kind of activities afterwards where they can demonstrate comprehension of what they've done, maybe extend that a little bit further, possibly use some kind of an online type thing. But let me go to one other step, because part of our goals for this particular session is to have us all think about the different kinds of learners who are in our classroom. And we were showing you quite a few examples of how you really scaffold for that very beginning level student, or maybe that student that struggles in their ability to understand. But what about sometimes if we have the Hispanohablantes as a part of our group? Or what if we have those students that are on that track towards AP or the gifted and talented? One of the things that we encourage us to think about is this concept of integración. And what we mean by that is the AP exam, just as an example, now asks students to look at and listen to different sources of information and then compare perspectives. How about if we started doing that early? So one of the things that we've done in our program is we not only give them that one video about this, but we have them look at other resources that are found in our digital course, and then they can look at the integración de ideas. That means comparing perspectives and points of view of different articles or videos and so forth. And they can also, of course, make that cultural comparison back to their own experience. Now, the way we've done that within the Auténtico program, and you may have your own system of doing this, is to provide students with multiple resources. So while they might have the video, they might also have an article that they would read, or maybe they would have a podcast on that same type of idea, Consejos para el Tiempo Libre. Now, again, I often say, wow, I had some Spanish 1 classes, I'd be as happy as could be if they could just understand the video and be able to get the cognates out of it. But maybe I also had the students who are Hispanohablantes, or those really challenged students that could go that next step further. And maybe what I could do would be then to individualize. We've even within our program allowed for that way in which digitally somebody could create a group of students within a class and actually give them some special resources along that same idea. But again, as we're thinking about adding that rigor and adding that challenge to our students, this is a great way to think about it. Of course, we want a lot of support for the teacher. So we want to make sure that we provide summaries of any of the resources that we have, give you that chance to think about, okay, I'm going to have them do these before reading and these before viewing and while viewing and after viewing. This is one of my favorites to think about, because sometimes we get caught up in just explaining what was going on in the video, and then we fail to realize, like, oh, I could connect an awful lot of that recap in Spanish. And so really supporting, how do I take this video and have a discussion and do this in such a way that I stay in that target language as we're being asked to. And then, of course, it's just a big overriding question is, wow, I need to differentiate. I have a lot of different kinds of students. How can I do that? What could I do for my heritage speakers? Like maybe writing a paragraph about their own personal experiences. What could I do for those students where maybe the captions go by quickly, and so maybe providing them a script or something might be the way that they would be supported. So I've gone quickly through a lot of ideas that I utilized in my classroom. I'm going to give you one last chance to kind of throw into some of your own chat questions. But Lucy, as you've been listening to this and thinking about teachers that you interact with or your own personal experiences, are there other things that have come to mind?
There are. Several of the teachers have indicated some of the strategies that you mentioned about watching the video, as you mentioned, without sound, or even letting them make predictions about how this authentic resource video might have an ending for them. So I love the fact that they're using authentic videos or resources in creative ways within their own classes. And sometimes they're giving the students to come up with outcomes for these, like what do you think the outcome of this is going to be, or who do you think is going to win if it's a particular activity where they're watching somebody have a battle or something, or a challenge. Who do you think the victor is going to be? So giving those predictions for the students to kind of think through what they've seen and what they've heard. I think these are some wonderful resources that they can use in their classroom, and giving them a chance to see culture through a different way. What did you see that was similar to where you live, or what did you see that was different? What was curious to you? So asking them questions that are particular to them, to have them think outside the box of, okay, I've seen this authentic resource, that's great, but what does that mean to me, and how am I going to incorporate that into my daily understanding of this new culture?
Great. Amy, anything else that you saw that was coming in the chat box that you wanted to call out as additional ideas?
Absolutely. So we had someone talk about, like you mentioned, giving context, doing comparisons, clue words, which is really important. Going back to that idea of, even watching it the first time without sound and seeing visually what stands out. The other thing that was talked about is the idea of critiquing, if it's like a movie clip or something like that, or a video clip, critiquing it, because I think when we're able to bring in opinions of students, they're more engaged. So everyone has opinions about
Great
everything.
idea.
Students. So if you can even take what they're watching, and even if they don't understand it all, if they can critique using basic Spanish, and if they can offer their opinions, I think that's another way, to set it up where they're fully engaged in what you're doing.
Great point. All right. So what we're going to do now is transition. We're going to do something similar, but now we're going to look at what if the authentic resource is a print text rather than a video. So what strategies and activities do you use? And as you think about print, you could obviously go to the world of literature, but a lot of what we're doing now is bringing in informational texts, sometimes at the very basic levels. Lucy had mentioned before, a menu could be a print text. A phone book can be a print text. So there's lots of ways that we can bring in print text. And what are some of the strategies and activities that we use? So here again is an example, and again in our Authentico program, you'll find an authentic resource in every chapter. And in this particular case, we are going to dive into an informational reading that has to do with kind of lifestyles, choices that you make. So you see, for instance, the idea of alimentación saludable. Again, we recognize that this was something that could be challenging. So let's always make sure that we benefit from the visual cues. Now, when we go into a print text, there's sometimes several things that we can use, because there can be photos that's included as a part of that text, graphics. So often those graphics, we can spend a lot of time just looking at an infographic and what that has to say. But I'm sometimes surprised at how often our students will kind of just not pay too much attention to what's the text layout. By that meaning, does this look like something that looks like a magazine article? Does it look like something that might have just been printed off of the internet, because that's going to help us also have a sense of what kind of information we might find. And even to the point of, are there headings? Is there bold font? Are there things here that the writer of this intentionally did, because not because they wanted me as a Spanish 1 student to understand, but because they wanted to capture the attention of the reading audience? Those are things that we should also focus on. Again, we can always use the idea of looking for cognates. We might give key vocabulary to our students. I've had lots of teachers when I've done sessions like this at conferences and so forth that talk to me about the importance of having students go through and find all the words that they know, first of all, before they encounter maybe some new words. And then another one that, that we've talked about that is actually utilized here, and that is using predictions. So the students are going to look at this article that I'll show you in just a moment, and they are going to be thinking about consejos or tips. And what they're going to think about is, okay, well, I know if I were reading this in a magazine that I was looking at on fitness or whatever, I might find that it would talk about this. Let me make some predictions as maybe some of the things, and then I'm going to start reading and seeing if I can answer some of my own predictions. I was online one time kind of searching through other reading strategies, because I'll admit, as when I was preparing to be a high school Spanish teacher, I wasn't always taught all the reading strategies that some of our elementary teachers know so well. And so I came across a couple things that I thought are really helpful. One is the importance of elaborating. And this is one that maybe many of you do, and that is mark up the text while you read. Now, granted, if you have this in a textbook, that's not always what you want to do, but we can often do, for instance, what I sometimes would do would be to photocopy just the first paragraph of a reading and have students go in and really mark that up. Some kind of a system like circle words are cognates, underline words are words that you already know because of your study of Spanish so far. Use question marks, draw pictures, write summaries. All those things are really good because it's encouraging a way to be active with that reading without just kind of wanting to fall back on just translating word by word, sentence by sentence. Another great way to do that is to organize. We can still use outlines like some of us were taught to do early in our study, so that we can do that. Charts, especially concept maps, are ones that I'm going to show you in just a moment that I think can be very useful. So what am I kind of talking about with one of these informational texts? So this is the one that I'm speaking of. It's actually one that, again, is available out there for speakers of Spanish to have them think about alimentación saludable. So again, this might be one where we start in, where we kind of help students understand the idea of consejos is going to kind of be key to the understanding of this. But alimentación, maybe this would be a case where, as we're starting to introduce our students to this, that we help them understand. You already know the word comida. Maybe you didn't get the word alimentación, where we can help them start seeing some synonyms to words they already know. And then as they would begin to dive into this, obviously going to be a lot of cognates, lots of different types of things. So be thinking about this particular reading or some of the kinds of readings that you use, maybe a reading that you're bringing in right now to your students on Dia de los Muertos, and some of the strategies that we're all going to be sharing in just a moment that would be applicable to any of those. But one of the main ideas that one of the main tools that I like to use are graphic organizers. Maybe I'm just a real visual learner, and that's why this always helps me. But I like this because early in my teaching career, I was kind of taught to use graphic organizers to help organize how I'm going to write a composition or how I'm going to do an oral presentation. But I began to discover in my teaching that these are just as useful for students to use in the ways that they demonstrate comprehension and do that active reading. So maybe as we're reading through something, we take this concept map and we put in the center la idea principal, which isn't always the easiest thing for some of our students to even come up with identifying what that is. And maybe we do that one together. Maybe we have kind of a group discussion and get what that idea principal es, all right? And then what we do is maybe individually or in pairs, they go through and start finding los diferentes detalles, and they put those into those satellite circles. Then the beauty of a task like this is I can use this now for my next step in having a discussion about the reading. Instead of having to revert back to those 18 comprehension questions that are there in the book at the end, I could use this, and this could be a much more interesting way to approach it. Another graphic organizer that I like to use when doing readings is this. It's supposed to kind of be like columns that support a roof or that support a floor of a multi-floor building. And of course, we know that those columns are always the individual pieces. But what is that idea principal? I'm going to work with my students to identify that and write that in the box that goes across there horizontally. And then we're going to look for all those diferentes detalles and see if they can identify that. So a great way to make this be an active reading task that then builds right towards your conversation afterwards about the reading, which is exactly then what we've done. Again, we've gone into activities to have the students do to check their comprehension, but again, into that idea of integration, where then we might go from the reading to a video to something else about this. All right, so again, kind of quickly went through to just to kind of get you thinking about strategies and activities that you might use to have your students experience authentic print text. Again, Lucy, anything that you did as a classroom teacher or that you've learned from other teachers that are such great strategies?
Oh, Rich, you went over so many good ones, but graphic organizers obviously is one thing that I find very essential because of how our brain codifies. So I think it's important as we look at second language acquisition that we're truly learning our second language through our first language. So bringing that ability to make those connections is very important. So it helps organize our thoughts, but also the use of cognates, which was something that I was very strong in my use in my classroom, and giving my students an opportunity to realize that they know really 30% of Spanish because it links from the Latin into English. And giving them examples for that of a pure cognate, like the word agenda, which is agenda. So if it's an exact cognate or a false cognate, like embarazada and embarrassed, so looking for those to make sure that they didn't fall into those traps, or an easy one like escribir, and then they would call out to me cognates that they knew were available, like script, scripture, transcript, transcribe. And those are just some ways that now, once they linked that to prior knowledge, it was theirs and they knew it and they wouldn't forget it. So I think you've come across some excellent points, and I'm sure many of the teachers out there are doing these exceptional activities in their own classrooms.
Great, thanks. And so you've heard from us. Amy, what have we heard through the chat box?
Sure. I wanted to share one that came right as you kind of transitioned into this next one, but it was related to video. I think it could be applied to text
Great.
as well sometimes. But it was, a teacher said, showing snippets of authentic videos and asking students to provide vocabulary they have been logging in their notebook. Or I thought this was interesting, asking students to create a mini autobiography of the characters from the videos, or if it's characters from a... And I love that idea of a mini autobiography because students are having to sort of, you know, readjust their thinking, like look at it from a different perspective and gather those little details, which sometimes is easier to grab details about people, right, than anything else. So that mini autobiography is a great idea. And then you had mentioned, you know, I think too, infographics, making use of the visual, and that comes back to graphic organizers too. And, you know, sometimes even scrambling word order and rearranging them logically, giving students kind of like using games sometimes, right, to make things interesting when they're looking at text. So those are a couple things that came in. And then one more. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Sorry, one more. A lot of think, pair, share to give students the opportunity to talk about it to each other and internalize it, which is a great idea too.
That's a really good point. Yeah, a lot of, sometimes we think of reading as being such an individual, isolated task, but using that idea of think, pair, share and making the reading experience be one that's a communicative process and one where we collaborate. Often you can really learn from somebody else how they tackle a reading when you're doing that collaborative. I love that. And I really like, Amy, where you first started when you took us back to a strategy that you said actually came from the video section, but also applied. That's one of the things I think I finally learned. I'm maybe a slow learner, but that is, I realized like, oh, all these different strategies that I've been learning and thinking about for pre-reading, you know what? Many of them have a very similar version for pre-viewing or pre-listening. And the same type of thing, an active listening task could have a very similar parallel to an active reading task. So once we really kind of get our brains into this, we start seeing the similarities that we can use with all the different language skills that our students have and that we're working on.
Absolutely.
So I want to go to the next question, and we're going to, because of time, we'll kind of go to these last two and kind of combine them together. And that is that when we think authentic resources, we also love to use authentic art and authentic music. So what are some of the strategies and activities that you've used? So here's one that, again, we all know that taking the works of Diego Rivera is just such a wonderful thing, so much culture to learn and so forth. But we also know that there was a time period when Diego Rivera actually captured the attention of a lot of Americans, and he was asked, commissioned to do murals in a lot of different places in the US, like this one in Detroit. But that was also the time where he started showing some political ideas, some that weren't so well accepted by others and so forth. And so that gets us into an interesting idea. So first of all, we could look at this and say, hey, he did this mural and he was trying to convey something about that working class and about people and so forth. What do you think that was, and what do you see in this? So that would be obviously a really interesting thing to get started there. But what it also does is allow us to maybe now do a spring off. Maybe as we look at the work, then maybe we want to then get into the topic of sometimes artists, professional sports players, other people decide that they want to also talk about some of their beliefs and some of their political ideas. Are they criticized for that? Are they justified? And all of a sudden, now this is obviously a little bit higher level Spanish class that we have, but then this work of art allows us to get right into that. And so students can then comment, whether they are commenting in class in a discussion, the way I used to do it back in my classroom, which was kind of in a spiral journal culture reflection, or whether they actually had the opportunity to work with a digital text and capture some of those ideas right there. So that's a beautiful way to do that. Now, since most of our Spanish teachers have lots of ideas about art, I wanted to make sure that I gave some time for you to share some things that you do with art. So I tried to convey here, or display here, several different types of art. And whether you are a Spanish 1 teacher or a Spanish 4 or an AP teacher, how you use this. But I also included one down here that you saw at the beginning of our presentation about Dia de los Muertos, because this is one of the really good opportunities when students can really be looking at works of art and begin to understand, as Lucy's been saying so well, that there's a lot of cultural connections along there. So again, I'm going to quit talking because I'm interested to hear what Lucy has to say, and then we'll turn it back over to Amy to see if anybody's saying anything about strategies for art.
Thank you, Rich. Well, of course, art is one of the ways that we can convey real culture as well, and they are authentic resources, which is fantastic. And I think the beautiful part about art is it also has sus épocas, as you will. They were done in a specific time period. So like, for instance, learning about Picasso and learning how Cubism came to be and why that form of art was considered revolutionary of its time, or very moving art forward in a modern art kind of way. So it's important to realize that not only are you looking at the work of art, but you're looking at a time snippet of the culture. And that's an important thing for us to convey to our students and then get an opportunity to talk about. And as you look at these beautiful pieces of art that you have in front of you, you're looking at a parade, obviously a political parade. You're looking at sunflowers. What most people don't know as they look at the sunflowers is Diego Rivera usually uses the sunflowers to portray the hard work of the people of Mexico. We're looking at Murillo over here with the boys eating lunch and how he portrays them. So it's important that a lot of the times artists have political statements that they bring about when they're doing art. And even though you might not realize it as you begin to study la obra de arte, a lot of that information comes about. So not only are you looking at art, but you're looking at la historia, la cultura, and el sistema político, which brings about a whole different array of questions and extension of understanding about the culture.
Great ideas. Amy, any of the ideas that are coming in from our teachers out there?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely have a few. And again, one of them kind of overlaps with print too. But Liza says, a few strategies I use for printed text are printed invitations and business cards in Spanish. I ask students to identify what the business card is representing and formulate a jingle in Spanish, which is a fun idea. And then with a party or wedding invitation, I ask students to write a short story based on the invitation. So for example, what will occur at the party, what's on the menu, et cetera. And then the students not only write, but also communicate in the target language. And then lastly, students have the opportunity to create their own business cards and invitations, which kind of brings us back to really, you know, sort of an art form, right, of creating things that have a visual appeal. So that was one thing that came in. Another teacher, Ali said, I teach Frida and Diego to my 8th graders. We do self-portraits. Like Frida and I take a mural of Diego's and cut into smaller pieces, and then each student gets a small piece and recreates it in a larger piece to make a class mural with all the pieces of the classmates. Wow. That's fun. Another teacher, or same teacher, said each class pre-K through 12 has a different art project we will make next week, from simple math decorated with jewels and markers to 8th graders, niche boxes with a poem, and mini kalaka placed in a decorated box to remember a loved one. So that's cool. A little more specific. For music, I played 2 different versions of Oye Como Va by Tito Puente and Carlos Santana. I asked students to compare and contrast both examples in which they liked. I also provide a mini lesson of the Cuban infusion by discussing the wave of musicians that migrated to New York and the influences of today's pop culture. And then we have one more, and I'm going through these quickly. So turn the classroom into an art exhibit. I love that idea, where students analyze each other's art and try to guess the artist it was influenced by and the techniques they use. They're also allowed to keep it anonymous to really allow students to convey deep thoughts and feelings. Really awesome. Wow,
that's really cool. And I love the example that was given about listening to a couple of songs done by different people and in different ways. That's a really cool thing to do. And that same thing many of us have done with art. So we could take Picasso's portrait of motherhood and compare that to other works of art that have Madre y Niño or something like that, and do that same type of thing and be able to look at that. So you had a couple of examples about music. So this is going to be kind of our final point, and then Amy will tell you about all the great resources that go along with our workshop today. So I chose this particular one because, again, I have to admit that sometimes when I looked at music in my classes, I would maybe focus just on the language, the vocabulary, or the grammar, or something like that. And I learned through looking at something that was done in our Realidades Cuatro, that another thing you can do is make sure that the music is another way of understanding that a musician has ideas that they want to express. So in this particular case, we've been studying on the topic of discriminación, prejuicio, estereotipos, and so forth. And so before we start listening to this gentleman's song, we're going to start thinking about what is it that goes from a característica de un grupo de personas to estereotipos. All right, how can we get to that? And again, do that really strong pre-listening task. And then, of course, we're going to go in. Now, if you don't know this song, Represento is a beautiful song that really talks about this idea. And again, our hearts go out to the people of Puerto Rico for what they've been going through. But this portrays that beauty of the Caribbean islands and much of of Latin America, of the fusion of people who come together and really trying to understand who they are. Interestingly, we find that that's something that is being on a lot of TV commercials and things that we see now, and that is just people trying to understand their background. So let me play a little bit of the song and then talk to you about some of the cool ideas that come out of this, and then some of you may still be chatting additional ideas on how you use music.
Hoy cantar se seguirá, pues traigo de mi patria sabor tropical y vuelvo a amar arena y sol, pues vengo del Caribe, zona del calor. El ritmo está sonando ya, la conga
All right, so again, I'd love to continue to listen to that, and I'm sure Lucy and I are in different states right now as we're doing this, but I can only picture Lucy is probably up on her feet with those beats that were going there, as many of you, I'm sure, were doing the same thing. But again, coming out of this, while we may find it fascinating to look at some language aspects there of words and so forth, really we're getting at the idea of this is all about rhythm and so forth, and what it's saying, and what they're talking about as far as the people and the color de la raza nueva and so forth. So really getting students to think about that, and then maybe turning it into our own students thinking about if they were to compose a song, what might that look like that would describe them. So just getting them to really internalize that. Lucy, Amy, any other things that have come in or additional ideas?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share real quick. Someone mentioned a song of the week, and I know I used to do that in my classroom. I think that's a really neat way. One, you can bring in the song, but also students can do that too, right? You can give a little bit of control to students and have them, talk about why they picked it and either what it means to them or why it was interesting, what they noticed about it. And I think even, in recent days, there's been more of a blend between music just in pop culture, right? There's been more of kind of the Spanish influence, I feel like, in pop songs, and that's been fun, I think, for students. And then the other thing, too, that got brought up, and this is kind of a general thing, but a teacher mentioned how important passion is. And I think that with any of the resources that we've talked about and strategies that we've talked about, it's important for you as the teacher to be passionate about what you're doing and maybe pick based on what you're passionate about, because that absolutely comes through to students. And it's an important thing to consider. So not only what will help, but what you're passionate about, because that is what is intriguing to students and gets their attention. So those are just a couple things, and Lucy might have more.
Those are excellent. One thing I did want to share is there is a band out there now called Bomba Estero. If you've never heard of them, they're a Afro-Caribeño band from La Costa de Colombia. And actually, I believe it or not, I learned about them on the Maryland World Language page. Gotta love Maryland. They posted it because there's a song called Soy Yo, and it's very something you could show to your students that you wouldn't have to worry about being inappropriate. And it's about how we're all different, and this young lady in the video talks about how she's different and how that's okay, and how we're integrating into our society and we're all different and that's okay. So it's a really nice example, easy to understand the lyrics, and it's got a very nice video that you can find on YouTube for free.
Great.
And we had a teacher say that they love that song, Lucy. So that's great. Last one that I wanted to share was someone, and this is more related to art, but called Living Portraits, having students act out or mimic a scene from a painting or a piece of art, and then encouraging students to find other media that represents the piece you're focusing on. So kind of bringing in, and maybe that's a song, connecting art and music. What's a song that maybe represents an idea that's found in art? How can you bring those together? So I thought that was a great idea.
Great, thank you, Amy. So what we wanted to do with our experience today was to use Lucy and me as a way to kind of just think some professional development ideas, how to identify authentic resources, to determine strategies, to explain ways to meet all different kinds of students' needs within our classroom, and again, obviously to have you contribute to that. But we also wanted to make sure also, since we chose to do this on this at this particular time, is to also share with you some ideas and resources that you could use for Dia de los Muertos. So I'm going to let Amy take back control, and she's going to walk you through not only did you attend today, but how you can get access to these resources, and wow, for the next week or so, or whatever time you want to use to be able to implement some of these in your classroom.
Wonderful. Thanks, Rich. So yeah, one of the things that we've created is just a way for you to access some materials. And I know a lot of you have been waiting patiently for some of the practical things. So this is a sign-in that you can use. Notice the username and password. It's Pearson Authentico and then Viva Pearson. So you can sign into our platform, Pearson Realize, and see some resources there. When you do log in, you're going to see a home page first, and then you can click into a program. And so you'll choose, you know, whatever level makes sense for you, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4. And then you're also going to see under My Content some things that we've added as well, some links that you can use. So that's one way to access it, is by going into Pearson Realize and taking a look at some of the things. There's also a class, Dia Muertos 2017, with some discussions that we've put in for you to use in your classroom possibly and project. There's some, if under assignments, you can see some things that we've specifically curated for you to use based on Dia de los Muertos. And then you'll also be able to, if you really want to, create a group and add your students. But I think for a lot of you, it might just mean using some of these resources in class. The other way is, if you don't necessarily want to log into Pearson Realize, we're going to be sending you a Dia de los Muertos toolkit. And notice that there's live links, there's questions, there's activities and suggestions. So you will be getting a copy of this so that you can take the strategies that Rich and Lucy talked about and that other teachers talked about and apply them to some specific Dia de los Muertos resources. And really that was the goal of today, is to give you strategies that, yes, apply to Dia de los Muertos, but also apply beyond to those authentic resources. So this will be really valuable for you. And again, you'll receive an email with this toolkit and the other things we mentioned so that you can dive in. And then if you are interested in taking a look at our program, which has you know, a myriad of authentic resources as well beyond just Dia de los Muertos, you're welcome to go to www.pearsonschool.com/tryauthentico and take a look. The other really cool thing is that we have recorded webinars that are available through this page too, from other sessions that we've done with Rich and other presenters. And you might want to go back, and some of you may have attended those too, but recorded webinars will be posted, and there's some other free resources too on that page. I want to see if there's any last questions before we sign off here. Thank you guys so much. We actually love talking with you as teachers. Spanish teachers in particular are very passionate, world language teachers in general, and so we love interacting with you. We've really enjoyed today. I want to thank Rich and Lucy for being a part of this, for being so available and sharing your experiences and suggestions. We really appreciate it. But I'll give everyone a minute. I'll stay on for a few minutes to see if there's any other questions. And we really look forward to seeing you again on future webinars, but also we want you to take advantage of some of the things that we've provided. Additionally, last thing I'll say is that the article that Rich mentioned at the beginning from ACTFL, the strategies for supporting or using authentic text, and there's a couple other articles in the handout section of GoToWebinar. So you can, you should be able to download those directly, but we'll send them out too. So that was something that Rich mentioned earlier. But if there are no more questions, we had a thank you. Thank you guys so much for coming, and we really look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
We'll talk to you guys really soon.